So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to today's kind of lunch and learn. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the future of work. Give you a little background on me. My name is Jason Flax. I'm a district manager for ADP. I work in the HR services and outsourcing division. I've been with ADP for almost 11 years now, and I've served in some different roles with them on the sales side. And I've also been in leadership with ADP. So being involved in a kind of a Fortune 500 company that supports businesses and the HR community the way that we do has been very unique. Being able to see and have information and being able to get perspective from not just our own little world here in Tucson, but from a national and also a global perspective. ADP is a very large research company as well as a service provider in payroll and HR related services. So the amount of information that we gather and what we can share with the business community is pretty amazing. ADP does pay 1 out of every 6 Americans, and we have the largest employer-employee related data set in the country. So the information that we gather and that we analyze is all real data. There's no survey data. We're taking actual live business related data. So the analysis that comes out of it is pretty incredible. So if anybody does have any questions, there should be a chat feature that you can ask a question on. I don't know if Jason or Carrie or Adam, if one of you guys wants to maybe monitor that and then just kind of interrupt me and see, because I'm just sharing my screen, so I can't actually see the chat feature.
Absolutely. I will let you know.
Great. Great. Thank you. So today, from an agenda perspective, we are going to talk a little bit about how work has changed. We've really done a lot of transition in the last 8 to 10 weeks to a virtual marketplace or to a virtual workplace. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those challenges that have happened in relation to that. We talk about worker well-being. Well-being is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is really kind of described almost as engagement. But well-being has a bit of a different overreaching or umbrella term, because engagement is really more about the engagement of what someone has with their employer. The well-being is just the overall well-being of the employee from a professional and a personal standpoint. Leadership and culture, there's been a lot of challenges in relation to that in the last 8 to 10 weeks. What some of the impacts to the employers have been. And of course, we'll just kind of follow up a little bit. If anybody wants to know how ADP can help, we can absolutely do that as well. So let's move to the future of work. I'm going to move my video over here. So the future of work is here. Does anybody out there also feel like we have aged 10 years in 6 weeks? Right? There's been so much, and it happened overnight. Right? We had this pandemic that started, that we were monitoring from across the globe, all of a sudden hit our shores and explode in creating massive change overnight. And it wasn't something that we really had a lot of choice in, right? It was our governmental leadership that is working to try and contain this epidemic for public safety. And so we've all had to adjust, and we haven't had a choice. Do we want to? Do we not want to? It's really been about that side of it. And so the choices that we have in the business community is really about participating in what that public safety looks like, our employer safety, what that looks like. But yet at the same time, how do we still operate? How do we still generate revenue? How do we still mitigate our risk? How do we still control our controllables, right? So we see here that lots of organizations have been challenged, and it doesn't matter what size you are. If you're an employer that's got 5 employees or if you have 5,000 employees, it doesn't really matter. Everyone has had to make adjustments. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, ADP is a company that we have over 55,000 employees in the United States. we moved 50,000 of those employees to a virtual environment using WebEx as our technology within 72 hours without any interruption in service to our clients. So it took a lot of work. It was a lot of resources, a lot of sleepless nights for a lot of people in our organization to create that support network, because we weren't just supporting the 50,000 employees to go virtual. We were supporting the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of clients that we had as well, right? So making sure that one of the most important things that happens to an employee, which is getting paid, still continues to happen seamlessly when so much of what happened to our community 10 weeks ago, what happened to our market 10 weeks ago, has up and changed. So you may say, wow, well, that's pretty easy for a large company because they have a lot of resources. It's hard for everyone, right? Moving that much to a virtual environment, no matter what your business is, whether you're manufacturing, whether you're service related, whether you're professional services, it doesn't matter, it's a challenge. So we all experienced this massive change overnight. The question really is, how do we respond to that? How do we make the adjustments and the adaptations so that going forward, we're prepared for something as unknown as this to happen again? Because it probably will at some point. There's going to be something that occurs, and it's going to cause us to have to figure out how to be resilient. Okay, so this has just been one simple catalyst to creating transformation overnight. Now, we've been talking about the future of work for several years and how things have been changing. Largely, it's had to do with the generational impact that we have 4 to 5 generations in the workforce, and 3 of those generations really doing 80% of the work, and how those generations work differently. But this was something that completely changed all of that, right? This was true business impact on a massive, massive scale. So what's really changed? Well, we're in a virtual environment right now. We're learning, we're participating in a virtual world over a Zoom meeting, which 10 weeks ago, some of us may not have even known existed. Some of us may not even known how to use, right? From a generational perspective, not everyone is comfortable utilizing technology. Well, guess what? We learned pretty quick, didn't we? 88% of all employers have some people working remotely or virtually, or at least are encouraging people to do so. That is a massive shift from 10 weeks ago, and it happened overnight. Thankfully, there was technology that was already in place to help support that to happen so quickly, right? Now let's talk a little bit about employee well-being. Employee well-being is not just employee engagement, and it's not just the employee being productive. This is their overall well-being. And a little bit more than half of the employees have been feeling out there that their well-being is better being able to work in a virtual environment. And they feel that way for a couple of reasons. They're enclosed in their one single environment. We have kids doing homeschool, but we don't have to transport them. Well, maybe we have to walk them to the kitchen or to the living room or the dining room so that they can get on the computer so that they can do their lessons. But when you're talking about that kind of stuff, now everybody's in a self-contained environment. We don't have to worry about leaving the house. We can manage our time as we need to, and that has helped increase our overall well-being. Now, is it a challenge? Yes, because do people feel like I'm enclosed, I'm stuck in my house? Absolutely, absolutely. But when the employee well-being can help and you can elevate that to a point where you're going to increase productivity and personal development and overall and lessen stress, you are in a good position as an employer. Now, 48% of employees want to send the message that their leadership is not doing a good job in communicating back to them. So if we say that 40% of employees are not happy with the communication or the style or the technology or the vision that leadership is providing them to do their job, we are going to struggle. And I think we've seen that, right? We've got, what was it, in the last employment report that ADP put out, we had 20 million people in the month of April go on unemployment. 20 million people. That is an astronomical number, going from less than 5% unemployment to almost 23% unemployment in a single month. That has had a huge impact, right? And all of that goes back to leadership and employee well-being and the virtual workplace. How well have we been able to adapt, right? And we've seen is that we've just been exposed. As a society, as a economic force, which has led the world for so many years, we were still exposed to gaps. So how do we overcome some of these things? But these are the things that have changed. We need to change our leadership styles. We need to change how we lead our people and how we coach our people in order to increase their well-being, give them confidence so that the productivity goes up while the stress levels go down. Now, let's take a look at some of these challenges that are out there in regards to those three areas. If we look at the demand of the employees and what they are looking for, you can see here that 59% of US workers who are working from home during this time frame would prefer to keep doing so on a limited basis. Now, that doesn't mean that they want to completely be in a virtual environment, but they want the option. They want the ability to do so. So if you're an employer today that's had to scale back, make changes, put a lot of these restrictions on, if you've had to put people on furloughs, if you've had to scale back hours, and know that as you bring people back, more than half of them still want to be able to have an option of being in this environment, are you prepared to do so? So that's a big demand on the employers, because if we look at it from a generational perspective, most of our leadership is from a generation that a virtual workplace is not a norm for them. They want to walk down the hall into your office or into your cubicle or into your cubby, and they want to talk to you about things, right? They don't text. They still use their cell phone, right? But it's different for that leadership of that generation. So now that we have more than 50% of the workforce being millennial, Gen Z, they're asking right now and saying, we want this environment to continue in some form or another. Okay, so that's a big thing. So now as we bring people back into the workforce and start rehiring from all of these furloughs and layoffs, how are we going to accommodate those needs? Because I tell you what, we just put 20 million people out of a job who are all going to be looking for a job. Who's going to say they want to come back and work at their old employer? They now have options, right? As the economy comes back and as all of these job openings happen, everybody has a chance now to fight for something or to apply for something or to go work for somebody that they feel like they may have a better opportunity with. So what kind of an environment are you providing as an employer? That's going to be the demand, is changing of the environment. Let's talk a little bit about productivity. Gartner has, and Gallup has put out polls, and they've done it to several different communities. In relation to when I say communities, I'm talking about leadership communities. Now, the HR community typically has the closest relationship with the engagement of the employees. And 76% of the leaders are reporting that the number one complaint from their employees has to do with managers monitoring productivity. Now, that's interesting. Managers right? Concerns from managers about the productivity or engagement of their teams when remote. Okay. Well, we're very used to managing productivity and engagement in person, aren't we? You can see that person across the cubicle. Are they actually working, right? What is the operational effectiveness from that standpoint? Metrics, right? Milestones, call them whatever they are. But the big thing is how do you manage productivity in a remote workforce when you've never had to do it before? That takes a really, really interesting and unique skill set on a management side of it to be able to balance trust and accountability, right? So the number one concern there is how do we do that? How do we do that? Employees want accountability. Believe it or not, they do. They want to be managed. They want to know how to do a job. They want to know how good of a job that they're doing, right? All of that leads back to productivity, employee engagement, and employee well-being. They want to believe that they're doing a good job. They want to believe in the mission of a company. Well, guess what? When you move remotely, you don't see anything anymore, right? It's the four walls in your house or your apartment or wherever you are. You don't see the effectiveness that that company is having on its vision for its clients, for its services, for whatever it is that they're doing. So it's a big thing, managing people and managing the productivity. The other side of it is now all of a sudden moving to a virtual work environment with productivity, the traditional 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 8 to 6, right? Shifts kind of have gone out the window, right? And we're starting to see that employees are starting to behave in a way that they're communicating back to their employer when they feel most productive. Are they most productive in the morning? Are they most productive in the afternoon? When do they get the most work done? Can they get it done in less amount of time being at home than they would have normally in the office, or having to be around a water cooler or other employees? So it's really a transformation over these last 10 weeks for companies, and an eye-opening experience for them to really observe and understand and analyze what their employee base is doing from a productivity level, and whether or not they have the capabilities of being able to watch those things. So we talked a little bit before about leadership and trust, right? 56% of managers actually let their employees work remotely. Okay, so what does that mean? What that really means is leadership is not comfortable providing a lot of trust to its employees. They don't necessarily think that the job can get done unless they're looking over their employee's shoulder. Even if you have the opportunity. I have stories after stories of people in Tucson where they are questionable as an essential or non-essential business, where their employer said, you cannot do your job at home, even though they had the capability of doing so. So what kind of message does that send? When you're talking about trusting your employees, when you're talking about wanting them to be as productive or what their well-being is, what kind of message do you send back? If there's a lack of trust, how can you expect an employee to be productive at home in that environment where they potentially could be the most productive? And then we look at technology, right? So if you look at technology and what technology has enabled us to do in the last 10 weeks in creating what this, I don't really like the term new normal, but maybe what this workplace transformation is going to look like, that over half of the HR leaders feel that they don't have the right technology or infrastructure to be able to support this kind of a work environment. Well, if that happens, and you have 60% of US workers saying that they want this as an option, what does that do for talent attraction? What does that do for retaining your top people? Right now, as the economy starts to open up and as businesses start to get back to the way that they feel they used to operate, there's that many more people in the workforce that they can now pluck from, right? So when they look at that and say, how do I accommodate that? Technology needs to be able to support some of those things. Now, there's certain industries that it's absolutely unrealistic, right? You can't manage a restaurant remotely. Very difficult, right? People come in, they sit down, they need people to wait on them, to serve them, bartenders, things. Hospitality is a very person-to-person type of an industry, and we need that. But manufacturing, yep, we need people operating machines. We need people doing things. But how much is now the manufacturing industry going to be looking towards automation and technology so that if an event like this happens again in the future, they are not subject to the same challenges or consequences that have happened during this? This has been a giant learning experience for companies in relation to how technology supports the resiliency of their business. So we're looking at these 4 areas in relation to what employers are facing into how they're going to start managing things in the future, right? The demand of the employee, the productivity of the employee in a remote environment, establishing trust and communication from leadership all the way down, and then bottom up, and then the technology that's in place to support them. These are the 4 areas that the C-suite needs to start looking at in order to get back to what that normal is, or really what that future is going to look like for that business. This is about transformation. This isn't about going back to normal, because nothing will be normal ever again. So let's talk a little bit about productivity and some of the benefits from work from home. 80% of employees are saying that they want to work from home at least some of the time. Okay, so now if we go back to that screen from before, it said 60% of workers who are working through here would prefer to keep doing so. This 80% of the employees wanting to work from home was before the COVID-19 crisis. So we've seen a little bit of a dip in that from that circumstance, but I think the idea and the message here is, right, the idea of working from home was really nice. Then all of a sudden it happened and it was forced upon us. And that transition didn't happen naturally, it was forced. So I think that we're going to start seeing those numbers over the next 12 to 18 months come back to about the same level of 80%. But you can see here that it's at least some of the time and not all the time. They want the option. Now, 65% of employees and 66% of managers agree that telecommuting increases productivity and reduces distractions. So we have to look at that objectively. We have to take our own personal perspective out of account in these things, right? Because we could say, oh my goodness, you know, I am not productive when I'm at home. Well, what are the reasons why? My kids are running around, my dogs are barking, my cat's in my lap, there's a TV 5 feet away from me, all of these things that I need to do. But really it's about time management at that point. And we see that the people that have created a schedule for themselves or who have been very good at their own time management actually can get higher productivity in a less period of time than actually being in the office. So when we look at this, it's no surprise that 65% of employees are saying that they can increase productivity and they can actually reduce distractions. Because the other thing too is they don't have to worry about commuting. They don't have to worry about traffic. They don't have to worry about getting somewhere on time, right? It's now just virtual, right? I don't have, oh my gosh, I need to leave 15 minutes early in order to get to this meeting. I don't know if I can. It's very easy to switch between tasks when you're in a virtual environment like this. But you have to allow yourself for breaks. You have to allow yourself for that well-being to come out of you. Taking walks, right? Doing different things. Sometimes we don't have that when we're at the office, right? Sometimes at the office, we feel like I'm constantly busy and I didn't get anything done. When you're at home, you go, I can't believe how much I got done and how short of a period of time it took for me. All right. It's amazing from that standpoint. Managers are saying the same thing, right? Why would managers say the same thing? Because they don't have people walking into their office every 3 seconds asking them a question, right? They're actually involved in getting certain aspects done for their own productivity, and they're able to manage that traffic and the employee communications in a little bit different of a style. It's easy to just really quickly respond to a text or to respond to an email. And it's less time than the employee walking into your office, and taking next 20 minutes of your time when you're in the middle of something, right? So it's how we are communicating with people in relation to that productivity and what we can get done. And believe it or not, in this State of the Work Productivity Report, managers said that they have more time to spend on employee development and employee engagement and employee interaction in a remote environment because it doesn't take as long for them to get the actual manager work done. And when you can spend time, that's when you start building trust, when you can spend time with your employees and you can increase engagement. So now if we look over here, 80% of remote workers reported higher morale. 82% said it lowered their stress level. Guys, this was back in 2014. 2014, 6 years ago, they were talking about remote working in a somewhat virtual environment, creating higher morale, less stress. Think about what this does for your employees that are single parents. What has it done in relation to daycare? What has it done in relation to being able to look after their children, going to doctor's appointments, managing that work-life balance? And this was 6 years ago. Today, we have better technology to manage the remote workforce. So why couldn't we take advantage of that to even catapult productivity to a higher level than we thought we could before? Does that make sense? Carrie, Adam, I don't know if you've been monitoring the chat. Have there been any questions so far?
Nope, there has not been any chats there.
Okay. Well,
I do have a question though. We're talking about
sure.
the working remotely. Talk to me a little bit about the security of that. I mean, I know that you said, I mean, you guys are a very secure business. So how did you handle that, and how do you see, or what do you hear with companies dealing with the cybersecurity part of that?
Oh, that's a big question. That's a big question mark for a lot of companies in relation to cybersecurity. We had at ADP, we had the luxury of having the ability to work remotely as an employee for many years. I've been with ADP now for almost 11 years. And since day one that I've worked with them, I've had the option of being in a remote environment. So, as a company for a decade, we've already been in this world. For a smaller business or for a company that has not really kind of dabbled in this, yeah, cybersecurity is a big issue. But it's also been something that's been around for a while in our personal lives, right? We've all had personal computers for quite a long time, right? We are very concerned about our own personal cybersecurity. So I think the transition from that standpoint is a little bit different. Obviously, for organizations, it's very, very important for you to not manage that internally. You need to outsource things like cybersecurity. You need to look at your IT infrastructure and start saying, what are the tools I'm using? Who's helping me mitigate that risk? How can I handle it? Because if you're a retailer, obviously it's going to be difficult to work remotely. But if you're a service provider and you can work remotely, your service may not be IT. That's not your expertise. So cybersecurity is definitely a big issue, but I think that's why you've seen a lot of things like Zoom and WebEx and Microsoft Teams. There's a gravity towards going to those companies because they have that cybersecurity already built in, right? We're not hearing about companies having team meetings over FaceTime or over Skype unless it's Skype through Microsoft, right? We're starting to see some of those things happen. But I would say that, as a small business, even a mid-sized business, your cybersecurity should never be handled internally. It should all be done externally. Does that answer your question, Carrie?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we've seen things, people have started learning all these new terms about VPNs, right? And I need to VPN in, and what's my RSA token, and how do I connect through Cisco, and all of these things in order to protect that information on the server. So yes, very, very big concern from that standpoint, cybersecurity. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about employee well-being. When we're talking about employee well-being, the issue really starts to come into play with, we're starting to talk a little bit more about mental health. We're starting to talk about stress. We're starting to talk about how that impacts productivity. And as you can see here, when Gallup did this poll, and this was about 8 weeks ago, when you talk about the impact, less than half of the employees agree that their organization cares about their overall well-being. There's the trust. There's the communication. There's the gap between your employees and you as the employer in relation to driving engagement and productivity. Okay. Gartner has done study after study on employee engagement, right? Marcus Buckingham has big on employee engagement. Simon Sinek, very big on employee engagement. And they're all in agreement that about 66% of everyone's workforce is somewhat disengaged in their current job. 66%. Now we're seeing right now that just under half the employees are saying that my company cares about me. If you're a leader in your organization, if you're an owner of a business, how does that feel when your employee says, I don't think that you care about me? That's tough. But yet you have an expectation on what they're supposed to be doing on a day in and day out basis. So even though we're talking about a pandemic and we're talking about a virus and we're talking about a disease, we really are talking about the culture that we're creating in our own workforces in relation to productivity, revenue, expenses, right? And how well we are doing. This has been a massive exposure of our strengths and our weaknesses as individuals and as businesses. And that's really tough. That's tough to come to grips with on a very short period of time, to say half of my employees, right, believe that I care about them. Because if you ask 99% of the business owners, they will say that the very first priority that they have is to their employees and that they care so much about them. But the employees don't necessarily feel that way. So that's tough. It's a tough realization to get hit with, right? 52% of Americans say that it's either likely or somewhat likely that this will cause financial struggles in the household. Well, of course, we just laid off 20 million people. There's uncertainty. Are we going to continue along this path? We need to open up the economy. We need to still keep public safety in mind, right? What are we doing in order to do that? There's a lot of uncertainty. I think we've all had enough stress in our lives to know that when we are very concerned about our personal well-being and our financial struggles, it absolutely impacts the quality of the work that we can bring to our employer. It's very, very difficult. So we're starting to see things like EAP programs, right? A bigger work-life balance. What does our benefits package and our fringe look like that we're providing? We're starting to see employers look at where they're investing in their employees, whether it's training and development, whether it's dollars towards a benefit strategy. We're starting to see that. But you can see that, right, 45% agree that their organization cares about them, which means 55% believe that they don't care about them. 52% of Americans are saying that they are going to struggle financially. And then you come back with 72% are worried that a family member or them will be exposed to this virus and then will have a greater impact. This creates a lot of uncertainty. That impacts productivity. That's why we're seeing revenue projections and budgets plummet, right, when there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's leadership's job to provide some certainty, have a plan, communicate it, right? Be that employer that people want to work for. And I tell you what, that's who the 20 million people that are out of a job right now are going to start looking to. Who are the employers that want the employees working there? It's a completely different mindset, right? In a 10-week period, we have gone from employers saying, I can't find good people, to now all of a sudden, what good people are out there because I'm going to need them all, right? Completely changed in a 10-week period. So let's talk a little bit about that leadership, okay? Crisis always makes this stuff happen, right? Don't change as people unless we're impacted by some kind of crisis, right? Think about it when we were kids. We just did what we did until somebody told us that what we did was wrong or against the rules. And then we had to correct that behavior, right? It's no different, right? Leadership creates the environment that the employees thrive in, or they don't thrive in. So when we have crisis like this, it really exposes those things. It exposes those gaps. And so you look at here where it says 39% of US employees agree that their employer has communicated a clear plan of action. Let that sink in for just a second. 40% of businesses have not given their employees the confidence in communicating, what are we doing as an organization to get through this? Wow. You know what? If I'm an employee that was just furloughed and my employer hasn't been communicating to me, said earlier, why do I want to go back to that employer? I know in 2 months, there's going to be hundreds of job opportunities, maybe thousands of job opportunities as companies begin to open up and scale back, right? So now it's more than ever is the time for leadership to really, really over-communicate with their employees. This is what we're doing. This is our mission. This is our vision. This is our values, right? Here's our plan. Everybody's going to have to make some sacrifices, but you are in my best interest, right? And so you look at Gallup and Gartner and all these organizations that study employee engagement. These are now who all leadership is turning to say, how do I reestablish this? How do I change the culture in my organization? How do I establish that trust, right? So these are the 4 universal needs that employees need to have in order to be as highly productive as they are. They got to have trust. There has to be trust there between leadership and management. They need compassion. They need to know everything's going to be okay. They need the understanding, which is why a lot of them want to have this virtual environment as an option going forward. Because at that point, they're going to feel that their employer is recognizing the flexibility that they may need to have, right? They need to know that there's some stability. Big thing, stability, right? If you go to work for an employer, you want to know that that employer is going to still be around in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 20 years, right? So they need to have that feeling that we are a stable organization. And what that means, we have a strong mission, we have a strong vision, we've got strong values, we've got clients that are great, we've got low turnover from an employee standpoint. All of our clients stay with us for an average of X number of years. We have a tremendous amount of stability and resiliency as an organization, right? Because when people get a job, they don't think about a job being short-term. They think of a job being long-term. Nobody says, I think over the next 10 years, I want to have 9 jobs. Nobody says that. Nobody says, I want to have 3 jobs this year. Everybody wants one job that's sustainable for themselves and their family for the long haul, because that's predictable. That creates less stress, right? And they want hope. They want hope from their leadership that everything is going to get better, right? That's the culture side of it. That's the leadership. That's the encouragement. That's the engagement. All will be fine. And we are going to come out of this better than we would before. They want that hope, right? Because there's enough uncertainty in our own personal lives. We don't need that in the office as well, right? They want the office to be the stable place, right? I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from people in the Tucson community also that have said, gosh, going to work was my happy place. And now I'm home, right? You talk about the environment that's being created. Do you think that a married couple with children has ever had to do as much as they've had to do within 4 walls before? Ever? I've got to work. I've got to clean. I've got to take care of the kids. I have to be a teacher. I've got to manage behavior. I've got to do all of these different things, right? So where's the hope that we're going to come out of this better? Where's the support, right? That's what people are craving from their leadership. And by doing so, that's where you're going to create, again, that resiliency. Any questions so far? No?
We're good.
All right. So I've talked a little bit about culture, right? How many people here feel that they have a defined culture in their workplace? I'm looking for head nods. Carrie's kind of side to side. Adam's sure. I can't really see Jonathan or Linda or Diana. I can't see your heads. You don't have your video on. But I think that's important to know, what is this culture, right? If you walked up, or if somebody walked up to you on the street and said, tell me something, what is the culture like in your organization? What do you say? Right? How do you define those things? Right? That's really leadership's job. Leadership's job is to help create that culture and that environment and then maintain it. But that culture is also shifting and evolving constantly, right? So we look at one of my favorite business guys is Mark Cuban, and I love him because he's just not afraid to say what he thinks, right? In a certain way. He's not afraid to tell you the truth. He's not afraid to paint the picture, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, right? And here's what he said a few weeks ago. He said, how companies respond is going to define their brand for decades. If you rushed in and somebody got sick, you were that company. If you didn't take care of your employees or stakeholders and put them first, you were that company, right? And people remember that. People remember those things. People talk about those things to their friends, to their family, right? People talk about how they're treated by other people, by their leaders, by their managers, by their companies, right? That's your brand. Brand and culture coincide. Leadership is the key. Strong leadership is the key to your culture. Remote leadership is a challenge. It's a big challenge. It's easy when your boss can come up to you in the office every day, look you in the eye and say, Diana, how are you doing today? I noticed that maybe you're down. Is there anything that I can do? Or, wow, it looks like you're having a terrific day, right? On the flip side. But when you're remote, you don't see the employees all the time. So how do you create that culture of engagement, right? Leaders need to be involved, engaged, and accessible, right? If I want to talk to my manager, because I'm a remote employee, my leadership is up in Phoenix, and yet I'm down here. But my leadership is always accessible by email, by our internal messaging system, by text, by phone. I don't see them, but all of those avenues enable me to keep them accessible, right? And for me to be accessible to them. It allows me to be more productive. It allows them to be involved. It allows them to still be next door when not really being next door, right? And that's all technology. We look at here and it says, now is the time to really ground people in why the company exists, right? Hope, uncertainty. These are things right now that people have really strong questions on. I hope things can go back to normal. I hope I can go back to work soon, right? Is my employer going to be around in 6 months? Right? There's a lot of things that are there. So the communication back to the employees from a leadership perspective on the stability, the hope, the plan, why the company does what it's doing, why it started, and going back to those things and giving that message back to the employees is all about building trust, is all about building hope. It's all about building certainty, right? When people talk about culture, a lot of times they talk about culture between their coworkers, right? This third point, right? On a typical exit interview, most people say what they enjoyed most about the job was their coworkers, right? Gosh, I loved working with the with those people. I didn't like the job, but I loved the people. I loved the people. Well, there's a disconnect that's there. How can you love the people but hate the job? Right? So that's when we're starting to talk about engagement and when you're starting to talk about culture. Culture is when engagement and productivity connect and it all becomes positive. Right? So now you've got everybody in isolation. Right? I haven't seen my coworkers in 10 weeks. Part of what I do for ADP is I work with my internal partners quite a bit. So now it's effort, right? Before, I'd see them at the water cooler, right? See them in the break room, go to lunch with them, go on meetings with potential clients and clients with them. You're starting to build that relationship and you build that camaraderie. Well, now they're not there anymore, right? So now it's a lot of work. Got to make sure I'm talking to them every day, right? This is where you see whether or not your company culture is strong and tied together or whether or not there are some gaps, right? If this is the first time that Adam and Carrie have spoken to each other in 10 weeks as part of the chamber, would you say that's a positive culture and a positive relationship, or are there things that need to be worked on? Adam's shaking his head.
Well, no, I mean, you're right. That isn't right. I was just going to make a joke about Carrie not wanting to talk to me anyways, but no, you're right. I mean, that's part of it for us is that we're just such a small group. You know, there's 12 of us right now. So we're banding together and talking almost daily just to make sure that we all understand what our culture is right now. And then try to relay that to our membership and prospective members. So I agree.
Absolutely. And culture is the hardest thing to really kind of drive and identify. Because if you think about small businesses, what is the typical phrase that a small business says, right? That a small business owner would tell you? We're like a family, right? Guess what? Every family has their dysfunction. Show me a family and I won't show you the perfect family. We just don't exist, right? Well, that's culture. That's culture. That is how people are interacting. What's the mission? And are we driving towards the same common objective? That's where you get productivity. So if you have people truly engaged, and you have the mission and the vision and you're driving towards the same goals, you're going to drive positive culture, right? And that's really what's important in relation to the resiliency right now. I'm sure you guys have been reading the paper about, right? Reading the paper. Does anybody read the paper anymore? Have been scrolling through news articles or watching interviews and talking about there's a big question in the hospitality industry on whether or not employees are going to come back because they're actually earning more on unemployment than they were if they actually had a job. That is a huge concern in hospitality. And so we've got to think about, if we had that positive culture, wouldn't the employees want to come back to work regardless of the circumstance? So what are we building? What does that need to look like, right? You should want every employee to come back to work tomorrow and bring other people with them who they know are good. But we're just not sure if that's going to happen right now. Okay, so let's talk about work is changing. You guys can see my screen, so you can probably see this, but I'm going to block this work is changing here. So in the last 10 weeks, we've gone from an aspect of stability to complete business uncertainty, right? I remember being in Tucson back in 2008, at the height of the recession, when we had a big problem with vacancy, right, in all of the businesses. You look at Grant Road, Speedway, Broadway, right, vacancy. Whereas opposed to 20 years ago, right, you couldn't even open up shop anywhere. There wasn't enough spaces if you wanted to be a business. Now you could go anywhere. So now we've got business uncertainty. So how do you create some stability around business uncertainty? Well, this is how business has changed. This is how technology has changed. We have created in our society a model where we have to infuse our business, our operations, our employees, our generations, and we have to build an infrastructure that can accommodate a culture of engagement and productivity across multiple generations that think differently. We have to create revenue. We have to infuse technology. We have to worry about rules and compliance. And so how do we do that? We've been doing that for a long time, and it's all been very slow. The one caveat now is that data is more accessible to every person on this call and to every business at the drop of a finger. We all have a cell phone, which is essentially a computer, which connects us to something like Google, right, or any search engine that gives us answers or data in less than 3 seconds, right? That data we all take in, and that's how we make decisions, right? We use the data that we have and the information we have to help us make decisions about what to do. The hard part is what data do you trust? And there is so much data out there, right? Whenever you Google something, on Google, there is a ticker at the top of the screen. So when you search for something, it shows how many sites came back, right? You can go page after page after page after page after page. How do you know which page is good? How do you know what information is correct? How do you know what's valid and what I should use? So now it's important to not only be able to access the data, but to be able to have partners that are experts in those arenas that can help you interpret that data so that you can be fully compliant, institute the right technology, spend your dollars wisely, creating the infrastructure for your employees to operate your business to generate revenue. If you're doing all that in an efficient manner, you create business resiliency. And that's the goal, right? Leveraging technology, leading through change, and managing the risk. This is what your employees want from their leadership. And this is why the future of work is not about what we do, it's about how we do it. And that starts top down from a leadership perspective. So what are we hearing? We are hearing out in the general public, right, that these are the important topics: cost and profit stability, right, risk management, talent expectations, process efficiency, leading through change so that impact is not, that change is not impacting our productivity, that's creating that stability, and the risk of the unknown. So we're talking about professional, organizational, and personal change that has to happen in order to create that business efficiency and resiliency, right? So a little bit on what's called human resource outsourcing, right? Because we're talking about the relationship between the employer and the employee, right? So most employers would say, well, that's, you know, the employees, that's HR's job. Okay, well, guess what? This is HR's time to shine when you have crisis. So the idea of having a company help you with HR is very important in that stability and culture, okay? Because they are unbiased when you have a company or a partner doing so. So you've got a couple of different ways to go about handling HR support, right?
Jason,
we have support.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just apologize. I want to let you know we've got another meeting at 1:15, so you've got about another maybe 10 minutes or less.
Okay.
I apologize.
I have not a problem. I mean, literally, this is, you know, just a couple more minutes. So, yeah. So you're looking at, you know, in our own businesses today, we look to partners and we look to centers of influence to help us with certain areas of the business. We turn to our corporate attorneys to help us interpret law. We turn to accountants and CPAs to help us with taxes and dealing with the government agencies that have to do with revenue. But we typically don't look at an outside agency to help us with how do we better manage our employees, which is really our number one asset. Okay, so you have an idea of things around things like comprehensive services, which is like HR consulting, right? Somebody to help you where you are ingrained into your employees on a day-to-day basis, where you're having another company really provide that support and backdrop on the things that should be important and providing that guidance. And so you have things in that arena. But then you also have another aspect of HR outsourcing, which is a PEO, or a professional employer organization. And that's where small businesses can really tap into expertise. And what they can do is then use economies of scale by banding together. So you think of how the Tucson Metro Chamber is an organization that has members, and those members count on the chamber to provide them with some information or on some resources on how to do things. Well, businesses get a chance to do that on a much larger level for infrastructure and cost containment and risk management by engaging in a professional employer organization to mitigate risk and to drive economies of scale, so that some of these things and these investments in the employees can be more affordable and more efficient. Then you're looking at outside different types of vendors. So ADP does have a marketplace where, kind of like an app store, where you can be connected with all different kinds of vendor partners to help you with different areas to support your employees, whether it's learning management or collaboration or financial wellness, things of that nature. And so we are keeping our employees in the loop of the common things that are going on in the marketplace. We're providing that expertise and saying, hey, here's this single location you can go, and you can see all of these companies that are providing support for different areas of the business. That is enough about ADP. What I would tell you is that this site down here, the ADP Employer Preparedness Toolkit, since COVID-19, ADP has averaged 25,000 hits a day on this toolkit for employers to get resources and to understand certain areas that are going on in this crisis. Things in relation to employee management, or benefits reporting or payroll reporting, or what should they do about some of these leave of absence policies that are out there? And then where are some areas that you can get support, some checklists, webcasts, articles. It's the #1 site right now nationally for employers to go to gain information on how to manage through certain crisis aspects. And we plan on continuing having that toolkit continuously that's going to have other resources other than COVID-19. So feel free you can go to adp.com and go into our resource section, and you can check that out as well. All right, we'll go through some of these things here. So when we're talking to our colleagues and we're talking to our friends that are challenged today, I hope you share with them a little bit about what the future of work could potentially look like and what some of those engagement ideas, and I hope you've gotten some ideas from today on how that works, and a little bit more insight into how to manage some of those things to create some priorities so that as you get back to work and you get back into the office, we're creating that positive culture, that engagement, that well-being, the productivity, the culture where people can thrive. So these are all the industries that are out there that are massively effective right now by this crisis, right? And let's just call it crisis. It doesn't have to be COVID-19. It could be anything. In 2008, it was real estate and residential, right? It was commercial, it was property, it was loans, which had a massive impact. This just happens to be a virus, right? But this virus has changed our environments and how we're working, and probably will do so forever, at least to some degree. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you coming to today to listen to me chat a little bit about the future of work, and very excited to see how Tucson responds to this, because I think we're going to come out of the darkness into the light, and we're going to be in a much better position than we were before. So very excited for that. So thank you.
Great. Are there any last questions for Jason from anybody? Oh, Linda says thank you. Jason, again, thank you. You always give great presentations, and this was a really good one. A lot of good information, so we really appreciate that. So,
and Jason, this
Sure,
will, for everybody that has been viewing this, it will be put on our website. It was recorded, so feel free to go back, and if you missed anything, just listen to it again. Great information, great presentation, Jason.
Can we
Thank
share
you.
your PowerPoint presentation, Jason, if anybody wants it?
Yes, you may.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
If anybody wants that, email Shirley or I, and we'll make sure you get it. So again, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.